minute chore and turn it into a 50-second chore, right?
Which direction would the open side of the three-sided structure be?
So I would take into consideration mostly your winter storms and find out what direction. Normally you're going to have a kind of a window of your storms. It'll be kind of like a 90-degree window, okay? And it'll be like winter storms come from this direction, summer storms come from this direction, but they're all pretty much here. Make sure your walls are protecting from there, and it might need to be four-sided with just an opening.
Okay.
If you have crazy wild weather that comes from all over the place. But generally, as long as they can get out from underneath an overhang, get underneath an overhang and back up against a wall, generally that's all they need. Even if it's just two-sided, where they can get up against a building and then there's even a low wall on one side, that's oftentimes enough. If the roof is square, they can get in the corner away from stuff. If it's just drizzling rain, goats hate to get wet. Sheep often don't care, but goats absolutely hate it, and they're miserable in it. So they'll huddle up underneath an evergreen tree just to get out of the rain. Goats absolutely hate getting wet, in my experience. So generally, if they can just get out from underneath the rain, they're totally fine. In Ohio, when we had goats when I was a kid, we would have a four-sided structure, and then we would have some plastic sheeting that would kind of give them an area where they could get out from the worst weather, because we'd have temperatures 0 and below 0 temperatures sometimes, and then you're getting into frostbite on extremities and ears and stuff. So we would end up with plastic sheeting and a hallway, plastic sheeting here, so you kind of have this like vestibule kind of insulated, so they'd go through 2 layers of that to get out of the weather. So I don't know quite what your lows are here during the winter.
Somewhere, wintertime.
Teens
are they're pretty common. Below 0 is once, maybe twice, or maybe a handful of days out of the year,
Okay. So you might want to go with like 3.5 sides to the structure. And like, for instance, what we did is we had hinged like 4x8 panels, and they'd hinge open and they just drop open, so that during the summer we could drop open sides, and then winter we could close it up and seal off from the worst of the wind. And the more animals you have, the more they can huddle up and stay nice and warm together. But you might end up with, on the worst cold days, you might get some extra hay and put some extra square bales around. Do not get heat lamps and put heat lamps out there. More people end up with burnt down barns from an animal knocking that heat lamp down, and it sits on the hay and then it ignites, and then you end up with the whole barn on fire. Don't use heat lamps. If it's so bad that you feel like that's necessary, go out there and just sit huddled up with them, wearing, toboggan or whatever you call them, and a winter coat, and sit there with them for half an hour and see if it's really that bad. There's a lot of people, even with dogs and stuff, livestock guardian dogs, they think, oh, poor babies, they need to come inside, it's too cold. The goats, their metabolism is different. They've got that rumen going. It's surprising what temperatures they can tolerate and be completely comfortable in, because they'll get all fluffed up. It's funny, when they're cold, they'll actually kind of fluff up like a bird. And they look ridiculous and poofy, but they'll be completely comfortable, and it'll be 20 degrees out, and I'll be out there leaving my nice warm house, not acclimated to that kind of weather, and it'll feel like, oh, this is just absolutely awful. But they'll just be completely happy just walking around, picking leaves off of the yopon bushes, and it's in the teens. So since y'all are going to be completely new to that, don't fall into that trap of thinking that they've got to be coddled, and then end up doing something that's dangerous, like putting those heat lamps in. Now, I have heard of people taking an electric blanket and laying an electric blanket up against a wall so that the animals can kind of push up against it, where you kind of get a little bit of an extra warmth. And then some people will take like an old bed sheet or thrift store bed sheets or whatever, and they'll take those bed sheets and they'll make like a little tent for the goats or sheep or whatever. And they'll come, you know, about head height for the animals, and they'll take that sheet, and I've done this before, and you take a stapler and staple to the wall, and then bring it up a little bit, and then maybe tie some paracord or something to pull up a little bit of a tent top, just so there's extra air space, and you kind of warm it up. You know, like if it's power outage and you don't have any heat in your house, you don't all go to your separate rooms. You go to one room, stand some mattresses up, put a blanket over the whole top thing, and it's comfy and warm in there because you have that body heat and it's trapped, and there's that extra insulation. You can do the same thing with a cheap sheet from the thrift store. So just think about kind of stuff like that. It'd be better to have a couple extra sheets stored away for that kind of scenario than heat lamp. Okay, so access to your structure is absolutely paramount. It's key. Don't ever box yourself into reducing access if you can at all maintain good access. By that I mean 8-foot wide to 12-foot wide access to your property. Like we talked about on the far side, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Make sure you have that access. The more, the better, within reason, of course, but be careful about limiting it. So oh, hi, spider. I'd probably be looking at air kung fu fighting these spiders. You've got some runoff here, so I would be cautious about any spot where you see a bunch of runoff from above, putting a structure right there. So I'm looking at this. I liked how flat this was at first, but then I saw how much erosion there was. That tells me that when it rains, there's a ton of water coming over here. So you might have to go further over there to find a better spot, or it might require going uphill, and I don't know if it levels off right there. I don't think it does. You might consider taking out a couple of these trees and then digging this out a little bit and diverting that water to the side away from the structure. But I get out here in a good rain event and just observe it. Come out here in some rain gear or umbrella or whatever when it's pouring, so you can see how much water's coming across, and you're just gonna have to gauge that for yourself. Because I mean, this could just be from a lot of time, or it could be big rain events that would pile water up. Yeah, you don't want water piling up against a structure. And these kinds of animals don't like wet bedding. So bedding that's wet in their housing area is going to lead to disease issues. You want it dry. So it might need to come out closer this way. It might need to come out over here, and it might require, you know, a little bit of a concrete footer poured right here to help build this up and level it out so that you have the space to,
Maybe if we cleared this, it might end up being,
yeah, that might be better.
this is just
Um,
an unused big old bushy area.
There's a lot of gravel right here. I don't know exactly what you're dealing with right here. That could be, this could be a shoulder that they built up to prevent water from coming towards the structure. If I had to guess, because it goes from there and it curves around right here. So I'm guessing that's why they did that. I don't see much erosion here though. So that's one of those things.